Well, I'll just put a note to this recording. So I'll call this one B. I was looking at a book this morning which I'd picked up at a funeral because the lady had written the book. And, well, I've not earnestly looked at it because I flicked through and found that it was basically a story. Well, it was meant to be a story, fiction, with, of course, religious content, but a fairly, what I might call traditional, evangelical, nonconformist Christianity of a lady who would have been older than me anyway, by about 15 years or so. Right, so I thought, I'll throw the book out. It's not my cup of tea, and I don't really feel it's going to be of tremendous value to anyone, which was a bit sort of dismissive, wasn't it? I looked at the appendix and, and something else there, but I picked up, the lady, when she wrote the book, she wanted to be a blessing to others, and of course in that sense she wanted to share her beliefs, her faith and trust in God and so on. I'd like to read to you the back page because it moved my heart and made me not able to throw the book away. You listen to this. It's a note from the author. When I was just 6 years old, I realized that I was down, very low, though not understanding the reason for it. In the school holidays, my parents and I went to visit my aunt, and she made the observation, "That child's always crying." Well, my mother glanced at me without comment. In the next hour or two, as I thought, remember she's only 6 years old, in the next hour or two, as I thought about it, I realized the reason for the tears was that I knew my father and my mother both rejected me. In fact, they were physically neglecting me, which was obvious to school teachers and others. I knew I was alone, and they wouldn't change. Well, of course, that really touches one's heart that any child should have to cope with this. It's almost beyond me that one could realize this at 6. 6 seems a long way away now from my ancient of years, but she was 6 years old. But of course, girls are more developed than boys anyway, so fair enough, that's what she says. That was 80 years ago, she writes. I had heard of an amazing God whom my grandmother had worshipped. Now, of course, this is an older lady, and it's almost formal language, isn't it? I had heard of an amazing God whom my grandmother had worshipped. I mean, we don't use the word worship now in 21st century, do we? Not really, not in this way. She was a lady much admired and respected for her successful life after leaving Ireland in dire poverty. Sadly, she died when I was 3.5, but I had heard the stories about her. I decided that I would worship her God, and he began to counsel me. But of course, this is not the way I talk or the way I record, language-wise. It's an old-fashioned language, isn't it? I decided that I would worship her God and began to counsel, and he began to counsel me. But you can feel the sentiment behind. Don't be deceived by the words, is what I mean. You know, the earnestness. Lovely, really, you know. In spite of grief and rocky experiences along the way, I am aware of God's support in my long life, giving me the victory in many testing experiences. He is my security, my guide, and my loving comforter. He always hears and answers my prayers. And that's her last word. And if I'd had this in my hand, I would have read this page at her memorial service, but I didn't have. No doubt God had a good reason for that. Well, again, untangle the words. In spite of grief and rocky experiences along the way, I am aware of God's support in my long life. We'd say now, things have been difficult, but at times, but even so, I felt God was with me and supported me and helped me. Do you see, we'd put it in that language, and that might communicate better to some people, but not to her generation, though. This may be exactly right, speaking person to person in her generation. Do you see? There's a tendency not to be moved because the language is wrong. But fortunately, my heart had already been softened dramatically by when I read. I realised the reason for the tears was that I knew my father and my mother both rejected me. And I suddenly thought, she was unloved and felt unloved. If only one could have rescued that 6-year-old then and there. Now, God didn't, of course, don't get me wrong. But you see, the realization that she knew somehow that she wasn't loved, and that pulls on one's compassion. Suddenly, there's no way I can throw this book away. Do you see, there's something that's said there by her that has made a bond, a loving bond, a oneness, calls upon my caring, doesn't it? Quite wonderful, you see. What I wanted to give from this example here to you is that it's the personal bond that matters. I've got a little young friend, he's obsessed with the computer, and he would think that that's his greatest treasure and happiness and so on. But as an older adult, we can look at him and say, no, look, son. Little boy, look. Your greatest treasure is the fact that your mum loves you. That's your real riches. Get things in proportion, in perspective, or your life will just be torturously difficult. You've got this treasure. You've got a mum who loves you. That's your treasure. Forget about your flaming gaming, and that's not going to be the blessing that you've already got. Well, some thoughts there. In particular, then, that it's your personal relationships. And of course, what our lady friend here is dead now, gone to heaven, wanted to say, really, wasn't it, that it's your relationship with God that matters, which is the epitome of all relationships that you'll ever experience. I mean, you can see how even if you're not religious, that almost by definition is the case, because we define God as being, in some sense, whatever the perfect is and the complete and our priority and most wonderfulness. You may have chosen not to be particularly occupied with such a cause and live accordingly, but you see what I mean. And importantly, it's the personal relationships that matter to you, not the other things in life. And it's those personal, important things that actually link us all up. Our deep feelings and deep values, hopes and longings. And we find we have an empathy, a bonding, sympathy, and a relation, a loving relation with people. That's what really matters. How much more a loving relationship with our perfect God, our Heavenly Dad. Bless you, and you are blessed. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.